So, what's the best way to learn? What's the best way to teach? What's the best way to lead? These are the questions I'm going to talk about today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my podcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about what is amazing about learning, teaching, and leading. Let's do a quick sound check. There we go. My name is Alain Faber. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I'm here to discuss different topics, something I care about learning, because this is my favorite way of thinking every day. I love teaching, been doing it for 25 years, and guess what? There's always something I am learning, and I like to share what I know. And the third part is about leading. Leadership is always something I love to talk about. And the reason for that is that regardless if you're learning something new, if you're teaching something new or new students, or if you're leading new groups or even new lives, there's always something new to from what to grow. So there we go. So if you're new to my podcast, don't forget, you're welcome to subscribe to this channel. I have my podcast every Wednesdays in the evening. Also, I have other topics that I'm adding as we go along. And if you've been in my channel a little bit, you have noticed that I'm looking into what are the best ways to add content to my channel. I've been doing a lot of work with leadership, but I also have a lot of students and a few teachers who are asking me ways to better learn or ways to better teach, and also about different topics. Science is one of my passion, and therefore trying to see how I can grow with this channel. It's a growing success, and it's always exciting to do. So let's see. My show is always divided in three parts. The first part is always talking about learning, what it means, different topics. It applies to students and all humans. The second segment is about teaching, and it's always relates to students, humans, and also teachers. And the third segment is about leadership, and that applies to my students as well, to humans, to leaders, either as part of your community, your class, or even if you're part of a business. And this is all part of me discussing different topics, and hopefully you will enjoy that. So the topic tonight was about how can we learn from doing. So that's my first segment about learning. The whole idea here is that when you are about to learn something, or when you want to learn something, often we think about lessons. Oh, we have a lecture that we need to attend. There's a lesson at school. There's a video on YouTube. And the whole time we are thinking we need to sit and absorb knowledge. Now, if you know people around you, you most likely know that they go on social media, and sometimes they can watch several videos in a row. They can spend an hour or two. And if you were to ask exactly what they've watched, sometimes they may have difficulties. And the reason for that is that sometimes if you're a passive learner, what happens is you know about information, but you are very far from knowing the information. And the best way to know the information is to actually do the thing. This is one of my main topic this week, because in my high school, we are doing final tasks for the semester. So the semester ends at the end of January. So in my science class, I have all this idea where we are doing lab-based evaluations. And the reason why learning is important for the whole semester is that I remember in September when we started the semester, many students in grade 9 had difficulties, not with the ideas and the topics, but to actually do labs and trusting that they will be able to find an answer. What was hard for them, sometimes they don't necessarily find the same answer as their classmates. But by doing a lab, it allows them to do something and learn from their activities. And that's something I like to do in my classroom. I like to do some lab-based learning. Then we go to lessons and some theory, some reading, some videos. Then we go back to a lab base so that at the end, we know about the topic, but we've experienced the subjects. And I think this is quite important. Because when we are learning, the first thing you have to keep in mind is that some of you said, well, it's like we are learning from someone, And then it's like copying, or some people say plagiarizing another person. And here, the point I want to say is the fact that when you learn something new the first time, the first thing you want to do is to copy the person, to imitate them. Little kids do this. A lot of companies do that as well. And if you're in a classroom environment, if you are in your team and you are working with people that are more veterans in the topic, what happens is that you learn from them. So some of you say, well, I'm copying what is said, what I have to do, and it works. So this is the first level of learning. The second level of learning is when you actually look at what you need to do, you learn what you have to do, then you try it a few times, you copy what is being told to you, then you expand a little bit, and then you go and learn from other people. And that's important because once you start learning from different people about the same topics, then you learn from their own experience. So I don't have a book right now, right here. I just cleaned up my table. But if you think for example, you want to start a business. So I was doing a research earlier about Alex Hormozy. So he is an entrepreneur, and he wrote his second book this summer. What is interesting is that if you read his first book, this is summarizing what he's learned for over a period of 10 years. And then if you read the second book, it's the same thing. So he condenses what he's learned over a decade or two into one source. And therefore, you can learn from that person. So when people are saying reading autobiographies or trying to learn what other people are doing, then you realize that different people have different perspectives. So you start learning with people around you. Then you start learning from different people around you as well. Because, so who says that? I think it's Tony Robbins when he says that success leaves clues. So that means that if you want to do something, find someone who's done it, then study them, then you will be able to do it as well, with practice as well as them. And then you go from a point where you can copy someone to actually modeling what they are doing. And eventually you're making that knowledge your own. And by doing that, then you are being unique in what you think, unique in what you do. And that's the best way to be able to contribute to the classroom, to contribute in your family, in your community, or in your team. This is, I think, quite important. If you go for the second aspect here, and here I'm going into my second segment today. My second segment is about teaching. And here I'm going to talk about the idea of teaching through doing. So then again, when you want to become a teacher, the best way to do that is to learn the lessons about what you need to do, the laws, curriculum, and so on. But at some point, you need to pay attention to, and remember about a lot of teachers you've had in the past, a lot of teachers in your college or universities where you're learning to become a teacher. And then the first thing you do is you copy, you imitate them, trying to say, okay, does that work for me? And after a while, then you start looking at other teachers around you. And what happens is by doing that, then you start saying, okay, knowing that success leaves clues, then you are able to look at different people, different teachers, different ways of doing things. And at some point, you can start modeling them even more, and up to a point where when you are feeling comfortable with the profession, then you can you can collaborate, you can share information in the best way possible, not just from your perspective to your audience perspective, but from the audience perspectives, better ways to learn, and then you adapt to your students, to your trainees. And I think that is quite important. Now, there's a progression here because when you learn something, you are making new knowledge yours, but the best way to learn is to actually teach it. So I do like to, so for example, If I have we finish a unit, and I've done that in the past, and it's kind of exciting, where you have a unit test coming up, and then you get whiteboards and markers, and that's one of my favorite activity actually. I put several whiteboards everywhere with key topics to cover. And what I do is I divide the class in small groups. They each have their whiteboard, and I give them 2 or 3 minutes to do a brain download. So they put on the whiteboard what they remember about the topic, what they know about the topic. And after a couple of minutes, what I do is, okay, stop. And then if I have 5 whiteboard, I tell them to do rotation and they go to the next one. The next whiteboard has a new topic. They look at what the previous team has written and then they add to that. So I do that for a second time, but this time I give a bit less time, knowing that the first team has done a lot of the easier part to add. Then people have to actually think, okay, what is in other things that hasn't been mentioned yet? And then if there are 5 teams, I go a third rotation, then a fourth, then a fifth rotation. At that point, the boards are usually full with the key topics, the main topics. And interestingly enough, they often include things I had forgotten that I had mentioned to the class. When the fifth rotation has happened, then I tell them to go one more rotation to their original whiteboard. And the reason for that is that when they go to their original whiteboard, they can read what they've seen, what they've written at first. That was their perspective. But then they can look at all the new things that the other teams have added. And this is quite a learning part here, because that first team was the team that spent the most time, the most energy to start with the whiteboard. And once they have a chance to read it, then I give them 5 minutes, and what they do is that they present to the class what is on the whiteboard. So it does a few things here. Everybody at that point has a good idea of what the key topics are, but everybody has seen a board only once with what they added. But because they know their first original whiteboard, what happens is that they know best, and then they can share with others what they know. Now, everybody have an idea of the vocabulary. Everybody knows the main topics because it is usually done before an evaluation. So what happens is when the students are telling others about their topics, about what the information is on their board, it allows everybody to better understand. So the people sharing information on their board, they play a role of teaching the class. But what is interesting is everybody gets excited because they already know the topics being talked about. They know the vocabulary, and they know that their turn is coming next for them to present. So there's always a little brain buzz when this happens. And usually within 60 minutes, within 75 minutes, we've covered and reviewed everything that we covered in the unit. Now, you have to keep in mind that after the presentation that is done on one board, sometimes I may add a few pieces of information. I do circulate around to make sure that there's no key difficulties or key issues. And what happens is, depending on how comfortable the class is, I can always say, okay, well, is everybody agreeing with the information there, or is there something to add or something to correct? And it's interesting because if there's a correction to make, people are proud to have noticed it. If they notice something is missing, and it is amazing. Now, not every class is like this, but it is something you can train and you can work together to get to this point. Because learning is amazing. Being able to teach is also amazing. And for both of them, you start with listening and getting domain information, copying or imitate, then you model, then you make it your own. This is the journey of learning. My third segment is about leadership, and I'm going to talk today about the idea of leading through action. And here, the main reason for that is that if you're a leader, often leadership is one of my fun topic, something I love to read about, something I like to share. Do I have the most experience in leadership? No. But every time I lead a workshop, every time I share information with the team, every time I meet others and I can lead a group, I get better. That's the only way to do it, because I do believe that the best way to learn, the best way to teach is to be, and the best way to lead is to actually do it. So, what happens if you are interested in leadership? Well, leadership has different ways. You can be the leader of a company, leader of your family, your religious community, your social group. It could also be if you're a teenager, you are a leader in if you are coaching little ones, if you're tutoring little ones, or if you're in grade 7 or 8, you can help the lower grades to get better. Grade 10 and 11 students are amazing at helping grade 9 students. So everybody can find a way to lead, because everybody knows a little bit more about something than anybody else. And that's why it's exciting. So what happens if you're studying about leadership? Well, the first way to better be a leader is to actually observe your own leader, learn about leadership through conferences, through books you read. Because keep in mind that if a leader has written a book, so for example, I do talk about Evan Carmichael often. I talk about Tony Robbins. And after this live, I'm going to do some research about Alex Hormozy, who I think is becoming more and more of a leader in the entrepreneurship group. And I think it's exciting. So what happened is that I get to know more about leadership through them. So I use my own experience and what I can learn from them, and then I try to copy a little bit to imitate what they do. But very quickly, in any leadership position, you notice that what someone else is doing is not necessarily what works for you. And therefore, you start not only to copy or imitate, and people may say, well, it's plagiarizing. Well, at the beginning, you have to start somewhere. You need to copy something. And then what happens is then you can say, okay, well, instead of copying, let's see if I can model what one person is doing. But then if you can take several perspectives, several different ways of leadership, and you make it your own, then you can model many people in one situation, and therefore you're becoming unique in the way you lead. And it's quite important because every leader is different for their own unique spice or zest they bring to the situation. For the same reason, every teachers that have taught for a long time, they have their little zest, the little things, spice that they bring to the classroom. Same thing with learners. Some learners have great ways of tricks in their sleeves to learn better. Because keep in mind that if you're a leader and you want to become a better leader, leadership leaves clues. And therefore, you can think about the fact that if you want to become a better leader, you start copying and imitating. Then you start modeling many people together. You find out where success is, you include it into what you do. And therefore, you are growing your leadership through doing leadership. And I think that's quite important. And this is the third topic I want to share here. And how can I take all these ideas of learning, teaching, and leading through doing into what I do in my classroom right now? Well, we're doing final performance tasks right now. And what I asked my students was, given materials we have, I wanted them to create a question that they wanted to answer. So what they have to do is to use the scientific inquiry process to answer a question that they wanted. And it's interesting because when you get to this point, I'm no longer teaching them what to do, because we've done so many labs in the last 5 months. They know how to do it. Do I need to do any teaching? I don't need to do any teaching because I've done all the teaching that I need to do. Now, they do it in teams. So that means that students are at the point where they can teach each other what they know, what they remember, and bring their ideas into the project. And it's always lab-based. That means that they have a question, they need to find data to gather data from an experiment that they create. And I always ask them to give me at least 5 different data point so that they can actually analyze it. So where does that lead me? That leads me into a position of leadership. So is it me telling them what to do? Not at all. Knowing that they have learned, knowing that they've experimented and that they can help each other. My goal as a leader is not to do the work for them, is to actually give them the support so that they have the confidence to say, okay, here's the question I want to answer. And then they can come to me saying, okay, how can I get to this point? And it's not for me to give them the answer. It's for me to ask them the necessary questions so that they can remember how to do it. Once they can get to this point, then they can gather data. And it's always hard because today we did data collection, and you could see how some students are worried. They're worried because they don't know if their data would make sense or if their data will mean something. And I tell them, a set of data, and if it works perfectly well, if it is the most amazing results as possible, then it's probably because your question was a bit too easy for you, because that means that you had a question and you received the data that you knew you would get. But when they're uncomfortable and they're not sure, it is good because that means they're going out of their comfort zone, knowing that they can trust the process to find the answer. And I tell them, if they get great results and you have an amazing analysis, science has been done and it's wonderful. If they get results that are not too good, but from which they can learn in the process of doing an experiment, but they can actually say, okay, oh, I know how I can make it better, then learning happens and their analysis can be good. And the reason why I wanted to do the lab today, or the labs today, was that I wanted them to know that if at the end of today they say, well, you know what, this is not quite, I have a better idea on how to make my results better, they still have tomorrow to be able to collect data. So I told them that, and at the end of the day, everybody had some data. So let's see what kind of labs I had. Some people, there was one group that decided to do bouncy balls. Perfect, they're borax and a few other chemicals. It's not dangerous, but they wanted to make the best bouncy ball. We had done an experiment during the year on, it was called city, not city putty, but we had done slime, and we had seen how the chemicals are similar. So they wanted to give it a try. So they create 5 or 6 bouncy balls. One is doing very good. The other ones are not well, but you know what? They've learned something amazing. There's one group that is looking at the flow of energy in salt water compared to water that has no electrolytes in it. So that's interesting. And it was interesting because they said, well, on paper, they knew what they should get, but it didn't quite work the way they needed to do. They had to do the experiment 3 times, but you know what? They got good data. There's one group one group is growing some crystals. They had bought a kit at some point in the store. They had looked at the recipe and what was involved, and they decided to do their own recipe. So that was interesting. So we'll see tomorrow. The crystals are growing tonight. There's one person that, let's see, one was buoyancy. There's one that is likes fishing, and they were talking about boats and how things are floating. And they were talking about how floating on the lake compared to on an ocean water. And they wanted to know if the salinity changes the floatability of a boat. So that was interesting. I think it's exciting. So we are looking at what the answers will be there. What was the other one? One wanted to use surface of contact. One wanted to know how fast this dissolution happens depending on the surface area. So at first they wanted to have sugar cubes, and I couldn't find any. So we were able to find marshmallows, and then we were able to find chocolate pieces. Then they tested the experiment yesterday and didn't quite work. So the idea here is they used ice. Today they took these sugar cubes and they sculpted them to have different sizes. So even the same mass, if they have more surface area, they wanted to know how it will be different. It's interesting. It was a group at some point, they were talking about tea and talking about how fast the sugar is dissolving. And we had discussion about pop and how the sugared water industry is a big thing. That was what they wanted to test. And I think it would be interesting. What were the other ones? Let's see. I can think of the other ones right now. That's okay. So here I have results today from my labs. What will happen tomorrow? Tomorrow they will look at more data if they need to. Otherwise, they start analyzing what they got. They're going to graph it. They're going to try to look at their questions, the hypothesis, and be able to tell me their conclusions and what they find out. Now, the way they would tell me the information, so here I will give a few different ways. And always keep in mind that a learner, students, you can always see them as a learner, but they can also teach you and they can also lead. So the leadership part works well in a team of students working in a group to make a lab. With respect to learning and teaching, they will be able to tell me about the information that they have gathered. Now, I'm giving them a chance to do it in two different ways. The first way, they can do a written lab report with all the different steps. They know how it is. If they feel comfortable, that is great. The other option is they can verbally tell me what they have done, their ideas, and their conclusions. Because some people like to write what they find. However, there's some others, they just like to talk about it. And there was a time when I would only accept a written report. But then I realized that there's some people that they're much better at explaining when they actually say it. And furthermore, when they present, it allows me to ask them specific questions so they can be better. And when they present or when they write their report, at that point, they've learned through their project and they are teaching me what they have learned. And that is quite exciting. It's bringing leadership into what they're doing. And interestingly enough, the students are going to different tables, different groups to see, okay, what are the people doing so that they can get better. So this is what we have here. Good. And that is the topic we have for today. So what did we talk about today? We talked about the best way to learn is by doing. And the best way to teach is by doing. And the best way to lead is by doing as well. Because when you start, the only thing you can do is you copy or imitate another person. And at some point you get better because success leaves clues. And therefore you start modeling many other people doing things. You get knowledge from different perspectives and you make it your own. And at that point, that's when you can work towards mastering a project or mastering a topic. On this, hoping that you had an amazing day. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have a chance to put in the comments below, I'd like to know how do you learn best, or how do you teach best, or how do you lead best? Because I can't wait to learn from you as well. On this, I wish you an amazing day. I'm going to put here a link to a video. I think I can do an end video of the playlist of my podcast, because you know what? The more we think, the more we address, the more we discuss, the better we get. On this, have an amazing day. Bye-bye.